Westminster Shorter Catechism, questions 82 to 84. Question 82. Is any man able perfectly to keep the commandments of God? No mere man since the fall is able in this life perfectly to keep the commandments of God, but doth daily break them in thought, word, and deed. Question 83. Are all transgressions of the law equally heinous? Some sins in themselves, and by reason of several aggravations, are more heinous in the sight of God than others. Question 84. What doth every sin deserve? Every sin deserveth God's wrath and curse, both in this life and that which is to come. The law, the moral law of God, requires nothing less than perfect, personal, exact, and entire obedience. At no point does God grade on a curve. At no point does he lower his standard to accommodate us in our sinfulness and weakness. And so we might ask, with question 82, whether anyone can perfectly obey the law of God from the heart, perfectly, personally, exactly, and entirely. And the clear teaching of Scripture is that, in fact, no mere man can. As Paul tells us, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. He tells us none are righteous, no, not even one. For God looks and behold, the thoughts and the intentions of man are evil continually. Jesus knows what is in the heart of man, and he is not impressed. Because the heart is sick and desperately wicked. And since the issues of life flow out of the heart, everything man does can only be evil. For what is good and what is evil is defined not by us, but by the law of God. It is not defined by the opinion of the masses or by popular opinion or by a process of reasoning or by our feelings. Rather, good and evil is determined by God as he reveals it in his law. Any thought, word, action, any feeling, affection, or emotion which falls short, wide of the mark of that law, is sin. This truth is confirmed for us by our own honest experience. For when the Spirit bears witness to our spirits through the law, we are like Isaiah, who is rendered undone in the presence of God and his holiness. In that case, when the law of God shines its light upon our hearts, we must confess that we have unclean lips and that we are in the midst of an unclean people. For an honest examination of a fully biblical understanding of the law, compared against our conscience, when that conscience is illuminated by the Spirit, can but only lead us to one conclusion: that we are in fact sinful through and through, corrupt in all our ways from the inside out. Now, we may be tempted to say that we are not really that bad. We may be tempted to comfort ourselves by telling ourselves that we really are not that thoroughly sinful. We may tell ourselves that we are not really evil people, like those prisoners, those criminals, or like those tyrants who oppress their people, who commit genocide or slaughter millions of their own citizens. Those are the ones who are really evil, not us. It is true that not all sins are equally heinous. If I call my brother a name and insult him, that is sin. but it is not nearly as heinous of a sin as it would be if I had murdered him in cold blood. Likewise, if I accidentally kill someone in an act of manslaughter, that is not as heinous as murdering them for their money or their car. So we can recognize that relative differences that exist between those sort of run-of-the-mill, law-abiding citizens on the one hand, and the serial murderers and torturers and killers of victims in premeditated and grotesque acts. We recognize that there is a relative difference between those two types of people. But the difference is only relative, and it is a difference and a discernment that man makes on the basis of what he sees and perceives from the outside. But both groups of people, in the sight of God, are sinners. Both are sinners by virtue of the sin of Adam. For both groups consist of people who have the guilt of original sin. And that original sin alone is enough to condemn to hell. But then there are actual sins. And while the actual sins of the one are more heinous than the other group, we have to recognize that each and every sin is an offense against the Almighty. And ultimately, that is why all sin is in itself quite heinous. Not so much because of the level of heinousness that is found within the sin itself, and not necessarily because of the character of the person who is sinning, but first and foremost because of the one against whom we sin. Sin against God. Even with a sin that would be regarded as the least heinous of all sins, is still an offense of cosmic proportions. That is because the Creator of all things deserves the undivided allegiance of His creatures. And so every sin, no matter how small or how great, deserves the wrath and curse of God. Galatians 3:10. Cursed be everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. You see, God is holy, and we must be holy if we would see Him. And we are to be holy because He is holy. And there is, of course, that holiness without which no one will see the Lord. But guilt and corruption is ours when we break the law, not holiness. Whether that violation be small or great, whether the violation of God's law be in our thoughts, or if it's in our words, or if it's in our actions, or in the subjective affections within, or even the mere inward disposition of our hearts. All sin is a breaking of the law and is deserving of the wrath and curse of God. So what hope is there then? Well, in fact, found within us is no hope at all. We cannot even begin to dig ourselves up and out of this mess that we find ourselves in because of our own sin. We are in quite the mess, in fact. But dead people don't walk out of their graves, and likewise, we cannot get ourselves out of this mess. Well, dead people don't walk out of their graves unless something radical happens to them. Now, in the third part of our course, we will talk about how to escape this mess. For God has, in fact, not left us miserable sinners without hope. He has made a way for our escape. That is because He has sent us a Redeemer. one who has, in fact, kept the law perfectly, the one who has, in fact, kept the law personally, exactly, and entirely, one in whom there is a righteousness that is needed for acceptance with God, but is not our own, one that becomes ours by Spirit-wrought faith in our hearts, whereby we are transformed according to the inner man and brought into an everlasting and vital union with the righteous one himself, even Jesus. For it is in him and in him alone that his righteousness can be imputed to us, received by faith alone, which alone is acceptable in the sight of God. And so in the next part, we will talk about the means of grace, how sinners, in order to be saved, need Christ. But how do they get Christ? How do they hear about this Jesus who has kept the law of God perfectly? How do sinners receive him by faith? In our next part, we will learn what God says about how to escape his wrath.